So I'm just going to be real with you here, alright? Europe's military situation, it's got people in the US straight up losing their minds. Pete Hegseth went off about how Europe's like this lazy freeloading sidekick, and he's not the only one talking wild. Vice President Vance, who's never really vibed with Europe like that, basically said he hates the idea of stepping in to save Europe again.
The Vice President said that the Europeans were freeloading. Do you agree with that assessment?
Do you really want me to answer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think they've been freeloading. The European Union's been absolutely terrible to us on trade, terrible. And as you know, NATO, I got them to pay hundreds of billions of dollars. They were way behind. And if you look if you look at Ukraine, so we're in for $350 billion because of Biden. Should have never happened, this war should have.
And you already know, their boss, President Trump, jumped in saying Europe's been freeloading off America for years, treating US trade like garbage, and that he had to force NATO to cough up hundreds of billions of dollars because they were slacking hard. But hey, let's not act like this is just a Republican rant. Even President Obama threw shade at Europe back in the day for not pulling their weight when it comes to military spending. So the big question is, are they right? Is Europe just riding America's coattails when it comes to defense? Honestly, yeah. But wait, before you come at me, there's a twist here. This whole setup, it didn't just happen. It's not some European plot. This thing was actually designed by the US itself, but let's back it up with some facts real quick. The US is basically the Hulk of the NATO alliance. In 2024, the US alone was covering like almost half of NATO's entire defense budget. That's nearly $968 billion, all from one country. And even though a lot of European countries stepped up their spending after the Ukraine invasion, that gap is still looking massive. Back in 2021, before all this popped off, the US was paying around 70% of NATO's bill. That's wild.
Because of what I did, hundreds of billions of dollars flowed into NATO by countries that just weren't paying. They were delinquent. They weren't paying their bills. So NATO is solid. They're strong, but they have to treat us fairly.
Most European countries weren't even hitting that 2% of GDP target NATO asked for. And let's not forget, there are like 100,000 US troops just chilling all over Europe, from Germany to Italy to Poland and the UK. These troops ain't just chilling for show. They're the first line if something pops off, and if it gets real, another 200,000 troops could get deployed fast, a lot of them in tanks that are ready to roll deep into Eastern Europe. And bro, don't even get me started on nukes. The US got like around 100 tactical nuclear bombs stashed all over Europe. You'll find some in Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, even Turkey. So yeah, looking at the numbers, it does kinda seem like Europe's chilling while the US is lifting all the heavy weights. It makes Europe look lazy or cheap or both, but here's the kicker, this isn't just the US letting Europe slack off, it's actually a setup the US put in place on purpose. Think about it, if Europe had its own fully independent military, that means it could make its own calls, do its own thing, not wait for Washington's green light. And you best believe the folks in Washington do not want that kind of energy. Go back in history, right after World War II, the US wasn't just rebuilding Europe's economy, it was setting itself up as Europe's bodyguard. And when Europe tried to flex on its own, the US hit the brakes real quick, like the Suez Crisis in 1956. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal and Britain, France and Israel jumped in, but instead of backing their play, the US actually teamed up with the Soviet Union and told them to back off. And they did. Total L for Britain and France. The message was clear, if Uncle Sam ain't in, you're out. France got the memo but tried to do its own thing anyway. In 1966, Charles de Gaulle pulled France out of NATO's main command structure, and even kicked US bases off French soil. That lasted for a while, but by 2009, France was back in the game. Even though France still doesn't host a permanent US base, they're deep in NATO's US-led structure now. After the Cold War, Europe started chatting more about doing its own defense thing. In 1998, the UK and France said at the St. Malo summit that Europe needs its own military capabilities, separate from the US. And surprise, surprise, Washington didn't love that. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was like, hold up, no duplicating NATO, no excluding non-EU NATO countries, and most importantly, no breaking away from the US. But Europe kept pushing. In 1999, the EU launched the European Security and Defense Policy, with this huge goal of creating a 60,000-troop rapid reaction force, ready to deploy in 60 days and operate for up to a year. The US clapped back hard. In 2000, Defense Secretary William Cohen said no EU caucus in NATO, and basically warned that NATO might turn into some outdated relic if the EU kept pushing.
Its core mission remains the collective defense of its members. At the same time, however, we need to ensure that NATO can confront the new dangers by promoting regional stability, preventing conflicts, reducing dangerous threats posed by weapons of mass destruction, and deterring aggression and coercion beyond its borders.
The US wasn't just skeptical, they were straight up shook about Europe going independent. A strong and fully independent European military could make NATO seem irrelevant and cut down America's influence in Europe. And at a time when the US didn't have any real rivals, even the chance of Europe stepping up felt like a threat. But the EU's big vision kind of fizzled out. US pressure plus internal EU beef, especially from the newer Eastern countries who still liked NATO better, made it hard to keep the momentum going. So yeah, Europe still can't move solo. They haven't built their own defense system, and now comes the next move: specialization. NATO, mostly led by the US, told all the countries except for the US of course to specialize. That means countries don't build full-scale, all-in-one militaries. Instead they focus on certain roles. Sounds efficient, right? Saves money, builds teamwork, all that. But here's the thing, once you specialize, you can't operate alone anymore. You need your friends to fill in the blanks. That puts Europe back in the same spot, needing the US. And the US, of course, supplies the key stuff that makes modern warfare tick, like air-to-air refueling tankers. Without them, Europe's jets got no range. Then you've got strategic air transport, with massive aircrafts flying troops and tanks across continents in just hours. Then there's satellite intel and GPS, mostly under US military control. Without all that, European armies would be stuck, limited and slow. From 2002 onward, NATO's push for specialization really gained speed, starting with the Prague summit and ramping up even more in 2011 with the Smart Defense Initiative. That shift played a big role in keeping Europe reliant. Alright, real quick, if you're getting value from this, drop a like and hit that subscribe button, so we can keep bringing you breakdowns that actually unpack what's going on in the world. So let's answer the big one. Why do US presidents keep pushing Europe to spend more?
We had some talks, and we told the European Union, we told the NATO people, largely they overlap, you have to pay more money because it's unfair what we're doing. We're doing a tremendous amount more. We're probably $200 billion more going into Ukraine, using for Ukraine to fight.
Obama wanted a minimum of 2% of GDP. Trump was talking 5%. Sounds like they want Europe to step up. Right. But maybe it's less about strength and more about the cash flow. European NATO countries have been buying the majority of their military gear from US companies. In recent years, some like the Netherlands have sourced nearly all their equipment from the US, while others like France bought only a small fraction. On average, about 64% of European defense gear comes from the US. That's a steady stream of billions going straight into US defense contractors.
If the threats truly are as dire as I believe they are, and the members of this alliance believe they are, then that threat has to be confronted by a full and real commitment to have the capability to confront these things, to confront them. And that's been the message President Trump had in his first administration, and it's the one he brings into this one. He's not against NATO. He is against a NATO that does not have the capabilities that it needs to fulfill the obligations that the treaty imposes upon each and every member state.
If European countries double their defense budgets, and most of that goes to American gear, that's not just a build-up, it's a massive windfall for the US arms industry. And Europe tried to shift that by proposing a €150 billion fund for their own companies. But the US wasn't cool with that. Some American politicians quickly pushed back, warning against shutting out US firms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button now, and help us keep digging into these stories that actually matter. Back in 2014, Obama began applying more pressure for higher spending in Europe. That pressure only grew stronger after the Ukraine war started.
The economic dimension of this war is as important as the military one. Over 1/3 of Russia's budget today goes to military spending. It is a war economy, so it is essential to undermine Putin's potential revenue.
And here's the thing, all signs point to the US wanting Europe to spend more, but not to become more independent. It's more about keeping them in the buyer seat. When you buy US military equipment, you're also buying into their parts, their training systems, their logistics, and even needing political thumbs up for major actions. It's like being locked into a whole ecosystem that keeps you from acting solo. So really, why would the US want a strong, fully independent Europe? They wouldn't. A powerful Europe could challenge US dominance, and let's be honest, the US prefers a circle of followers, not equals. Managing a big, tight European bloc with a united defense and policy is way harder than dealing with 27 individual countries. Those fragmented states are more likely to buy separately, follow separately, and move separately. That's also why you've seen the Trump squad backing up nationalist, far-right parties across Europe, like AfD in Germany, Fidesz in Hungary, and Le Pen's crew in France. A fractured Europe is easier to control, easier to divide, and easier to profit from. Does that mean Europe should ditch the US? No way. The alliance matters, but it needs to be based on respect, with Europe as an actual partner, not just a piece on the board. Thanks for sticking through this one. If you're into content like this, support us on Patreon, and don't forget to subscribe, because we've got more drops coming your way soon.